Welcome back to the WTF Sunderland podcast for another of our pre-season shows as we look over the latest Sunderland transfer news and count down the days until that clash with West Ham United at the Stadium Light next month. To join me is a special guest in the shape of Phil Smith from the Sunderland Echo. Phil, you're over in Portugal. I feel like the last time we spoke, I was in Portugal. Now you are, so no jealousy at all. But how are you doing, mate? You all right?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. I'll just tell the listeners now that in Faro is currently Europe's second largest motorcycle rally. So if a load of motorbikes scream through at any point during the next however long, my sincerest apologies. But yeah, it's really nice to be here. I've been here a lot now, partially through Sunderland and partially through other things. It's a lovely country. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it's stunning. Not gonna lie, I missed it. I was in there for a week before the playoff final, and God, that killed me out. But yeah, things changed, and thankfully for the better. But look, loads of fans over there in Portugal at the moment as well for the two games. We're speaking ahead of the game against Sporting Lisbon tonight, but loads of fans over there. Feels like it's an exciting time for the club. What's the feeling over in Portugal with the fans and the players?
Yeah, it's a really, I think everybody's excited. I think it's going to be really interesting to see the season starts, whether that momentum just rolls on or whether reality bites a little bit. But I think everyone at the moment is just feeling really upbeat, really excited. I think you can tell everyone's still kind of got that post Wembley glow. I think really, well, not just Wembley, the whole playoff campaign, and I think definitely from the players' perspective as well. There's a really nice blend at the moment between there's still that like tightness and that buzz from last season because it was obviously such a sort of tight group and they've got all those memories, and then also this feeling of like, you know, wow, we have to step up again here because these new players have come in. I think they've lifted the level, not just the players, the coaching staff as well. Like a massive injection of like elite quality, I think would be the only way to describe it when you look at the sort of background of these guys and where they've worked. So yeah, it's a really there's a real buzz about it. It's definitely the sort of most upbeat, the most positive environment I've kind of been around, I think, on one of these preseason tours. But obviously, you know, we never get carried away by preseason, and we all know this is going to be a tough season. So let's wait and see. But yeah, feels like a club really on the up at the moment. It's nice.
It's funny. Like I went to Portugal a couple of years ago for the dreaded Rangers game where it was cut off after 45 minutes. That was like 500 quid down the drain. And sadly, I had to fly back the next day, so I missed the Roma game. But I remember the players did like a signing session to kind of apologise for the game being abandoned. And obviously, they've done that again sort of this year. I think the club posted some stuff, and there's been opportunities for the fans to meet the players and the new lads. And look, I know you're not in the dressing room, so you can't give me the exact lowdown, but how do the new lads seem to have settled? Obviously, there's a lot of buzz around all of them, really.
Yeah. Well, I think it helps. It always helps when players sort of arrive together in a group, if that makes sense, because I think it's easier for them. You know, they're not kind of on their own, and you know they've got those kind of other new lads to bounce off a little bit and stuff. And as you say, I'm not sort of embedded in the dressing room, but even just from sort of the brief time that I've had around the group, Noah Siddiqui is an absolute live wire. Always seems to be part of something daft going on. Runs about on the pitch, seems always to be running about literally every time I've seen him this week. So I think Sunderland have got a real character there. I'm going to go early, and my hunch is I think he's going to be a little bit of a cult favourite. I think just from the way he was crashing into a pre-season friendly of the night leads me to think that fans are gonna have a lot of fun with him. I think so. Yeah, I think they seem to have. I think it's a really good group to come into because obviously last year the squad was quite small. And I think they're a really, really tight bunch, especially because obviously those that kind of really special, but it's also quite tough at times. Sort of few weeks they went through at the end of the season, so I think it's a nice group to come into. And for sure, like I think the new signings they already look pretty comfortable, to be honest, and they're good players. Like I've watched a little bit of training over the last few days that the speed and the intensity is quite clearly gone through the roof. I think with combination of these new lads coming in and like the players who were there being like, yeah, I've got to go again. Like I had a good year last year, but I am not going to be in this team unless I, keep at this level. So I think there's a real healthy competition there.
I agree with Siddiqui. He looks like everything that a Sunderland fan likes, running around a lot, getting into tackles, and thankfully a little bit of quality as well, which I think is kind of the blueprint of any fan's favourite. But look, one player that hasn't come in was Lauriente. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think probably quite surprised because the here we go had happened and basically everything you'd expect from a transfer before the actual confirmation had gone through. It hasn't gone through, and obviously we haven't been given the full information on it. But from your understanding, what's the reason behind the falling through, if you're aware of anything?
I don't know the exact details. I think you know me, Graham. Like I wouldn't try and say things that I don't know. I try and keep it as simple as possible and just pass on what I know. Um, the timeline of my understanding was the deal was agreed. Obviously, these things, are never fully done until they're done, but the outline of the deal was agreed. Obviously, you don't fly out to Portugal if that's not pretty much there. Um, I think he had his medical on Saturday when Sunderland were playing. Now, between that medical and the pen being put to paper from all parties, something pretty dramatic has changed. And I think there's probably two things to point out here is that one, like, it's not brinkmanship. Like, this deal is not happening. Like, they're not haggling over a couple of quid. I think that's a really important point to make. Something pretty dramatic and fundamental has changed. And that is unusual, but it's also a reflection of the fact that we are talking about very different transfers now. The liabilities and the money involved for Sunderland, and for the players as well, is absolutely massive. And you've got to be absolutely sure, and it's got to be absolutely right. So between that kind of process of him arriving and him putting pen to paper, something very fundamental has changed. I'd be lying if I said I knew what that was, but all I can tell you is that my understanding is it's not it's not something that they think can be kind of rectified pretty quickly, and it's not because they've gone in for somebody else. That's definitely not the case. The other thing I can definitely say is, like, I've kind of had chats with people at both ends of the deal, and I don't think there's any bad feeling. So it's a really weird one. Really, as I say, really unusual, but probably a reflection of the fact that, like, you have to be so careful with this stuff now. We're in a different world. The financial liabilities are so vast that, yeah, it's a completely different ball game. But yeah, odd one. Sorry, I can't give you more than that. But that's kind of how it's played out for me, being out here and following it.
No, I think it's an interesting one as opposed to a one that matters that much, because if it's not happening, it doesn't actually matter. But I tell you, the part that I find interesting about it is, like, whatever the reason may be, look, if it's a medical, that's different, and we'll probably never find out. But let's assume it's something to do with the deal somewhere along the line, whatever it may be. What does that say about how Sunderland are going to operate in the market? Because I think there's been a misconception, definitely outside of Sunderland, that Sunderland are just ready to splash the cash, and not really thinking too much about it, which obviously isn't the case, because within the club and as a fan base, I think we know we're not doing that. But what does this sort of say, with the deal not seemingly being right for Sunderland for whatever reason, about how we're going to operate in the market moving forward?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. There's this. It's been a weird one this summer where people are talking about the money and Sunderland, and a lot of it comes from, like, rival clubs and stuff, which you get. But this idea of being reckless or paying over the odds and stuff, and, like, I found it really interesting because, I mean, Sunderland, it's far from unprecedented what they've done. I mean, they're far from, spending more than other clubs who've come up. I'm just really baffled by this. I mean, if you actually look, Burnley have spent pretty much the same this summer, and nobody's talking about that. So I find that aspect of it really odd, to be honest. And yeah, I think the Lauriente thing definitely tells you, as I was kind of alluding to before, that there is a willingness to invest here. Like, Sunderland are super serious about trying to establish themselves in the Premier League over the next 4 to 5 years. But this idea that they're just going out and stockpiling players and just paying whatever the opposition club wants, and there's no kind of rhyme or reason to it, like, is so far out. And the fact that they moved so quickly on Diarra and Siddiqui and players like that tells you that a lot of this work had already been done in the previous months. They had a really clear sense of who they wanted to go for if they got promoted and what they wanted, and they've just gone and done it. And yeah, like, they've spent money and they've outbid other clubs. But to be fair, that's because they've been really prudent for years. And at times we've sat on podcasts like this and we criticised them for it. Why didn't you get by a striker in January? Why didn't you loan in that player? Well, the whole point was, they've now arrived at the Premier League with an absolutely huge amount of, PSR headroom, and they resolved Joe Bellingham's future early and got a big fee in. So that's what's allowed them to do it. So yeah. Listen, you don't know if it's going to work. You don't know what the season's going to look like. But the one thing I can say is, like, yeah, this is not a financially reckless club. If anything, it's completely the opposite. Sometimes, to our frustration. So, and I think the Lauriente deal, as you say, I think it kind of underlines that this is not a club that rushes with its money, for sure.
You spoke with Richie over the weekend, and you spoke with the media and whatnot about the challenges that might come with the fact that every single player we've signed is likely to be going to the AFCON, or the SAFCON as it's now known, SAFC Con. But what has he said about that? Obviously, the piece on the Echo, if people want to read more in depth, but what's kind of the thinking behind why Sunderland have gone down that route?
Yeah, I mean, typical Regis. Honestly, I got so much time for the man. I asked him a question. He was just like, "Well, yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously, we know that is going to happen." Quite funny, but I think the point he was kind of making. Well, there was 2 points really. One is that you can't get everything you want in the transfer market. There's no ideal window. And ultimately, Sunderland are just trying to get the best players they possibly can. But I think the point he made was kind of making to me was, we're not done yet. Like, we're not going to leave ourselves in a position where we have players where if they go to AFCON, there's going to be no one behind who can come into the team. I think that's obviously where the Lauriente one's a bit of a blow because obviously he would have been a natural player who could have come in for a Dingra with a bit of luck, Mundell will be back by then. Providing everything goes well with his sort of comeback. But yeah, the overrider message was definitely like, look, we're not done yet, and it might not look quite as severe when the transfer window's done. But I have to be brutally honest as well, and I kind of respect him for it. There was also an element of, yeah, it's going to happen. It's not ideal, but you don't get everything you want in the transfer market, and we've signed players who I think are going to make us really competitive at this level, and it kind of is what it is, really, to be honest. Yeah, he's nothing if not direct Regis. Or Roger, as they were announcing him at the stadium on Saturday, which I really enjoyed. So yeah, it's just like we're not done yet. We'll have more depth, but also we'll have to deal with it. Was very much the kind of the summary.
I really enjoy me and Ashley have took bets now where it's like almost like a shot every time he says it's going to be a challenge. Like, because it's just everything he answers says it's going to be a challenge, and he's never wrong with it. But he's no, I love him too. I mean, obviously for multiple different reasons. But you touched on Romain Mundell there as well. I think a massive blow, but it's been a really weird one with Romain Mundell. I sort of tweeted on, I think it was like Friday night, that it would be a shame to see him go, but just based on the fact that he'd been linked to PSV and Monaco, nothing like that was kind of imminent. And then all of a sudden he's got this injury and he's posting a photo of himself in the hospital bed after surgery. I mean, A, how big of a blow is it, and have to give you any indication, or do you have any indication of how long he potentially might be out for?
Not really, and I don't want to like speculate too much because I don't really like doing that with with players. It's their careers and their
Especially
injuries.
with the kind of injury he's got as well, mate, to be
Yeah,
fair.
yeah, and so it's a bit of a look like it's not a good one, but it's not a absolutely horrendous one. Is how I would describe it. So what are we now? A month out from the season, pretty much. Like he's not gonna be back for the start of the season, and I would be surprised if he was back. You know, a couple of games in. I definitely think we're talking about a good period on the sidelines. So I don't think we're going to see him for a while. To be honest, I think he's had his surgery, so I think we will get a time for him within the next few days from the club. So I think that's something we'll have more clarity on. But for sure, Sunderland have to plan for the first, I don't know, 5 or 6 games or whatever it is without him. I think, and if he can get back quickly, then that's a bonus. I think it's a massive blow for him because, and I think it's maybe like a bit of a lesson for all of us really because I know there was like loads of speculation happening on Friday and stuff, and like absolutely devastating for him to sort of miss so much of last season, to come back, to start pre-season really well, to think he's there, and to then be facing like another long spell on the sidelines. I think, we can't underestimate like mentally some of the challenges of injuries, especially when it's like a repeat. And this is something that I spoke to Niall Huggins about after South Shields and like almost that feeling of going back on the injury treadmill and not being part of the group and not being able to do what your job is. So really, really difficult for him and just hope that the surgery corrects it now because I think from my understanding, you'll remember we were chatting around the Wembley final about Mundell and whether he could play and all that stuff. Someone were kind of monitoring at that time. There was a feeling that he might need surgery to correct this for good. And that's where a lot of those discussions around the playoffs were coming from. As it happened, he made really good progress and it looked like he was through it and he was fine. But I think having happened again, it's obviously they've now decided that surgery is the route to go down. So hopefully this can help get to the bottom of for good. I mean, there was a different injury, but it was a bit similar if you remember with Abdullahi last year. He sort of had that groin issue and took him a while, but the surgery did essentially get to the bottom of it and solve it. So, and now you look at him, he's kind of flying. So hopefully it's the same with Mundell. But yeah, like it's a blow for something, and I just feel for him really because it's just rubbish, isn't it? That's the third one in less than a year, and then getting back on that treadmill, it's yeah, a real shame for him. And I think everyone here is good for him as well. He's a popular lad, you can sense that. So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. This is sort of short-term pain for long-term gain. I think that's very much the idea of going down the surgery route.
Talked about Huggins there before. I think, unfortunately for Niall, it's sometimes easy to forget him because through no fault of his own, he's had like these different random long-term injuries, like the knee, the back. Like none of them are really connected. It's all just been pure bad luck. But from what we've seen of him when he has played, there's no doubt that he's one of the best fullbacks at the club. And if he was fit, I would dare say that he'd be a regular starter in the either left or right back. I think he'd even challenge Trey for the right back position. But he's back. He's been playing. I think he's been fitter longer than we expected. But I think the noises from the club, actually, I think they said this. They wanted to wait until the end of the season and get him like a pre-season and stuff. He's performed really well in the first two games. You've spoke to him. What kind of spirit is he in after finally getting back into the team after what 18 months out or something like that?
Yeah, relieved, cautiously optimistic. I think there's always a little bit of wariness, but I think he feels good. I think the big thing for Huggins, which I spoke to him about after that South Shields game, was like he knows he can do it now because obviously the last time he came back into the team, obviously the first half of the 23-24. I always get confused. Yeah, I think so. He was outstanding. He wasn't just like filling in. He wasn't getting minutes here and here. I think before he got that injury, he'd been in contention for one of our players of the season, wouldn't he? And so I think that has given him so much belief that he can't. He's able to get fit again, but he can also get to the level again. I think that's given him a lot of belief. And listen, I think as well, like things have worked out well for him at the moment, and that fullback is obviously a position where we're super light. Obviously, Ray is fit and will come into the team at some point, but he was given some time off after the Club World Cup, so he's still a while away from playing. So I think Huggins knows that like he's going to get game time over the next few weeks. Like he's got a chance to build himself up and put himself in the picture. And I think for me, like the fact that he can play both sides and look, very comfortable in either, for me, like at the moment, as things are, I think it's just a no-brainer to keep him around. Does he get in the Premier League starting 11? I don't know until I've seen Reynaldo. It's really difficult to know. But we're circling Elise out, obviously, for a little bit at the start of the season. I think he's a massive asset to have around. And the one thing you can say is, again, which is really impressive, he's not lost any speed or any pace or anything like that. So that obviously gives him a real kind of fighting chance.
So another lad that's played so basically both of the games or started both the games was Jensen Seelt, another player that, to be honest, that kind of unfortunately, out of mind sometimes when you're a fan base and he's been out for that long with that really bad knee injury, unfortunately for him. But I was really impressed with him on Saturday in the first half. I thought he played really well. He's obviously an absolute unit. He's got the size, he's got the strength that you'd expect in the Premier League. Do you see, or do the club see him making an impact, or do you think he'll be given a chance to get maybe regular minutes on loan, or is he going to be part of the first team squad from your understanding anyway?
I think, well, at the moment, you couldn't lose him, could you? Because there's barely anybody else. I think, like, obviously, Nectar's there as well. Nectar's had a little injury, which has obviously stopped him playing on Friday, which was a bit of a shame. He did train yesterday, so I don't know if he'll play tonight, possibly. But yeah, so far, it looks like Seal's maybe slightly ahead of that. And I think with the level of interest in Triantis, we'll wait and see. But I wouldn't be surprised if maybe it was right for whether it's a loan or permanent for Triantis to go. So that kind of means that Seelt obviously has to kind of stick around for now. But we'll obviously wait and see exactly how that kind of pans out. He does look really good. He's definitely filled out. I think that's really noticeable. The one thing I would say is, like, obviously at this stage of his career, like, he needs minutes. So we'll wait and see what happens. But I think maybe a loan, I still think is probably going to be best for him. Not a reflection on his ability. I just think if you look at his career, he hasn't actually played much senior football. So I think that's kind of like the obvious next step for him.
Talk about Triantis there. Obviously, I watched him appear a lot last season, almost as much as I watched Sunderland play. And I think with Triantis, he was excellent in the midfield for Hibs last season. And no offence to Hibs or Scottish Premiership, but the Premier League is a bit different. I thought he would have been given a chance, or I thought he should have been given a chance if, say, we hadn't gone up. Thankfully, we have. He said he wants to knuckle in and stick in and try and impress Regis Lebris. I think the big thing for Triantis, and I don't know how many people are aware of this, yes, he's Australian, but he can represent Greece. And I think he's admitted now that Greece have made contact and said that, they would be interested in potentially calling him up as well. And it's a World Cup year. So there's the idea that he's always wanted to play in the Premier League. He's not going to be first choice, whether he stays or goes at Sunderland, because there's so much competition. There's a chance for him to go back to Hibs. That's not quite happened yet. Where do you see his future this season? Because it's obviously very imperative for him that whether he plays in the World Cup for Greece or Australia, that he gives himself his best chance of getting in the World Cup, I think.
Yeah, and I think that could prove to be a bit of a deciding factor. I think it's really difficult because of this little injury. I haven't really had a chance to watch him play much, so it's really difficult to see what his actual level is. And the thing about Driantis, which I'm really interested to see how it unfolds in time, is that obviously he played his best football. You'll know better than me, but he played his best football at Hibs, didn't he? In defensive midfield. So it's kind of like there's not really an opening for him at Sunderland with that. So I think it's going to be a really interesting to watch. I think he's in a little group of players with probably Abdullahi and Alexic as well, who I actually think have come on loads. And if we were still in the Championship, I'd be thinking these guys can definitely be part of the squad and play quite regularly. But yeah, I think that realistically, I personally think a loan for all those guys is going to be the best option.
Talking about sort of loan moves and players that are going to be maybe moving on in the summer, there's been a big one for Matty Young. Obviously, he's not going to play first team football in the Premier League yet. Incredibly highly rated. I think Salford City have been linked to him at the moment. But Anthony Patterson wasn't included in the team on Saturday. Obviously, I don't know if there's an injury or something behind that, but there's been speculation behind Petrovic. There was Bolka before that. And now Matt Young's allegedly being linked with going out on loan again. Is there a thought process that potentially we could possibly be having a new goalkeeper over the next few weeks if Matt Young is to go out on loan? Is that the thought process, or am I putting two and two together and getting five?
No, I think they're definitely still trying to sign a goalkeeper. Yeah, that's definitely the impression I get. Patterson's just got a little knock, so the fact that he wasn't involved the other night is nothing to do with transfers or anything like that. He's just got a little knock. I don't think he'll play tonight, but I don't think it's a major injury. So certainly the Hearts and Hull games, I think he'll be involved. But it's still definitely the plan to sign a goalkeeper. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Obviously, the sort of line that Sunderland have got to tread is they have to get the balance right between they want to add a player to compete in the goalkeeping department. At what point do you get so far down your list that you no longer add an upgrade? I think that's the big challenge. And I think once, when you see Bolka and Petrovic going elsewhere, it's going to be really interesting to see what they can get. But fairly or unfairly, rightly or wrongly, whatever people's opinions have on it, they are definitely trying to sign another goalkeeper to come in and really compete with Patterson. I think that's definitely still the case. But it's not why he's not in the team, but that is definitely what they're planning to do. I still think, what they're still looking to add in the spine, goalkeeper, centre-half, potentially one more midfielder. I think that's still the kind of key priorities here.
I was going to ask, where do you see your strength in next? Because I think, look, I think, and I've been maybe one of the more critical fans of Pato, as much as I love him, but I think he's been written off a little bit. But there is a concern naturally with centre half. We've just touched on Jensen Seelt there, and basically he's playing at the moment and performing well. But essentially, there's not really anyone else because unless he's injured or Nine's injured, there's players there from last season's spine, including Mepham's gone as well, that just simply aren't available. There's been random links to centre halves and stuff like that. I mean, without mentioning any names, is that kind of the idea, is to strengthen that and maybe add one or two numbers to that area?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's no coincidence that you're seeing links of a certain kind of level and calibre. They are definitely looking to add one kind of starting centre half, if you like. Doesn't mean 09 can't come back and compete and get in the team, but they are definitely looking for a big kind of, don't want to use the word upgrade because that's kind of accidentally disrespectful, but a real top calibre player in that position. And this is the challenge they've got at the moment, is that those players are really difficult to sign and they cost a lot of money and you have a lot of competition. So some of them don't want to rush because they want to get the right player and they don't want to waste that money. They also know the season is 3 weeks away and they need a centre half for the start of the season. So I do think it's one that they're going to have to move on at some stage. But yeah, definitely, I think if I'm looking at it, goalkeeper and centre half to me look like the two that they're most active on at the moment. Obviously, another midfielder they would like, which is where kind of the Xhaka links come from. The one thing we don't know at the moment is what they'll do with that kind of forward left wing position. Will they look to somebody else or will they take a breath now after the Lauriente thing's fallen through? I don't have the answer to that at the moment, but definitely I think centre half and goalkeeper are two key areas they're looking at and working on at the moment.
Well, one more before I let you go. I think I know the answer to this because I've had the gut feeling with it the whole way through, but it's naturally really exciting when you hear Granit Xhaka as being linked to Sunderland, and it looked like it was sort of dead in the water. I think there was Neom, who I can't say without doing the car noise, Neom, were interested and they've then pulled out. Then it was a case of Bayer Leverkusen who were quite happy to keep him. I think it was Friday, Saturday. It looked like he was going to stay in unless it was a silly offer and it wasn't going to happen. Then another link comes out yesterday. Is it a bit pie in the sky, Sunderland getting Granit Xhaka because it sounds like they don't want to let him go unless it's silly money, and are Sunderland with, I don't want to use the word the model, we'll call it an ambitious project these days, likely to spend upwards of £17 million on a 32-year-old, rightly or wrongly?
I don't think so. I don't have a huge amount of inside info on this, but I think that the you sort of look at anything, oh, that's interesting. Xhaka might leave this summer. Obviously, adding experience and quality of that level would be amazing. And you dig a little bit deeper, and he's got 3 years left on his contract. So, I mean, Leverkusen are just going to let him go for nothing. And as you say, we've seen Sunderland are prepared to invest a lot of money this summer. But the fees are being spent on young players with resale value, right? Like, they're not just spending money on, there is a long-term financial logic to it. So, listen, it doesn't get this far and it doesn't get to this point unless there's some level of encouragement. I think that's obvious. But I just think it feels very, very ambitious in terms of, the finances that it would take to make that deal happen. Does that deal work? I'm not 100% sure. So it's one that's sitting here right now. Like, if we get a here we go for Granit Xhaka, like, I'd be incredibly pleasantly surprised. I think would be the best way to put it. My friend actually messaged me when that link first broke. And I said, well, you can be excited, but just don't get too excited because, there's obviously something in it. But I'd be amazed if that was a deal that happened. I just think there's too many obstacles and difficulties, if you like, in actually getting that one done. But you never know. I've seen some wild stuff in my time, so who knows? But I definitely wouldn't be getting overly excited. I think it would be my advice.
Yeah, fingers crossed we all get surprised with that, but I don't see it. Tell you what, I said it was the last question, but I've got one more actually. We talked about this privately yesterday, and I was saying that I didn't expect Xhaka to come in either. I think it's pie in the sky a little bit, unfortunately, although what I'm proven wrong. Does it surprise you that Sunderland didn't end up going for Henderson? Because obviously it was never even close to happening, but he sort of fits. He's like a prep. I described him as a Premier League Corey Evans signing if we got him, and clearly there's no interest there. Are you surprised by that?
I was a bit. I think it was a really, really weird one. That I think my opinion will definitely be formed on that one at the end of the window, because I think it's always difficult at this point when you sort of try to assess the business, and the reality is there's targets that we don't know about. That's always the case. And so I'll have a much better, stronger feeling about it when I know what something they've actually done. I was a little bit surprised because, as you say, on paper it feels like the perfect fit, the experience, sort of what he would have brought to the dressing room. The one thing I would say is, even at the very start of the summer, when I was chatting to people about it, people were quite hesitant about it. I do genuinely think that what happened with Jermaine Defoe's return, definitely, although Henderson was a totally different set of circumstances, I think definitely made them more cautious about this kind of thing because of the way that kind of derailed the season. And let's be fair, if Stewart had got injured after Defoe promotion had gone. So I think a lot of people talked about the Henderson thing in terms of he'll be brilliant in the dressing room and stuff if he comes in. Henderson's still playing top level football. He's not coming to a club to be a cheerleader. Do you know what I mean? So it was one that I was surprised, that's the honest answer, but also I wasn't, if that makes sense, because I was genuinely never getting noises from inside the club that this is something that they were really, really working on. I think there were just quite a few reasons why they weren't quite sure. And ultimately, if they aren't sure, that's the best thing to do, because you don't want if someone comes back and it sours, that's obviously really not what you want. So yes and no is the boring answer to that question.
Boring at all, mate. Phil, I'll let you go and top your tan up, mate. Not jealous at all. I'm currently looking at the kind of humid, rainy, wet Glasgow, which I'm not really enjoying at all. I'm wet and I'm sweaty. It's not nice when I'm in the house, but you're going to enjoy topping up your tan, mate. Cheers for joining.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.